Welcome to the ultimate ranking of the best non-boss enemies the series has to offer. To ensure each game gets their time to shine, I've selected 3 best enemies per game, and I'm going to use a randomizer to put them in pairs. I'll then have to choose which of the 2 is better, and the other will die. Now, let's start up that randomizer machine. So, our first contestants, Lothric Knights vs Old Hunters, is a tough one already. Lothric Knights helped pave the way to some of Elden Ring's finest, most fun enemies, and I gotta love them for that. And for the fact that they're on their own brilliant as well. They're some of the few enemies in Dark Souls 3 that aren't easily R1 spammed to death. And they don't R1 spam themselves, so that's chivalrous of them. It's all about finding the opportunities to hit them when their shields are lowered, usually right after they've had their turn of attacking. They can even do weapon arts like you, making it feel like an even playing field. So if you're into some classic knight versus knight action, these guys most certainly scratch that itch. There's a pretty good variety of them in late game as well, most deadly of which is the Ultra Greatsword monsters. Old Hunters have a great variety as well, despite ever only appearing in a single area. They might not have the most interesting patterns to learn, but they make up for it by just being so fucking cool and using badass weapons. Bloodborne obviously doesn't have knights, but these are as close to knight type enemies as this game gets, and they're great. What sticks out the most for me though is how they help tell the story of Hunter's nightmare. They're trapped there for an eternity, mindlessly hunting beasts, who at this point can't even defend themselves. They're probably just glad to fight you since finally they're getting some sort of challenge. And well, Lothric Knights most certainly pose them a challenge as well. But I think I'm like slightly leaning towards Old Hunters. They might not have set the gold standard for knight type enemies, but on their own they feel like the most iconic Bloodborne DLC enemies. Sorry Lothric Knights, if you were up against any other Bloodborne enemy you would have won, just not against Old Hunters. And since we're on the topic of enemies, you know what game has plenty to fight that are challenging and rewarding? Yeah, that would be Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of this video. In case you somehow haven't heard, Raid Shadow Legends is a content-rich RPG with super in-depth battle systems, amazing graphics, countless champions to collect, and lots of multiplayer components. But again, we're on the topic of enemies in this video, so let's talk about the Hydra. As you'd expect, it's got numerous heads, all of which have their own unique mechanics. The Head of Blight, as you can imagine, is all about poison and life leech. Head of Decay might sound similar, but it's more about debuffing you and buffing the other heads. Head of Suffering is the tank, basically. Head of Wrath, the main damage dealer. Torment torments you with true fear, and Mischief mischievously steals your buffs. So it's like fighting an entire well-rounded raid group. It's tough, but if you're feeling confident about your abilities, there's a new clan-based competition, Hydra Clash, where you and 4 other clans see who can kick Hydra butt the hardest. So now's the perfect time to start playing, and you can get a head start by clicking my link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen on your mobile device. You get the epic champion Knight Errant, plus more. So thanks Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to spitting that randomizer thing again. I pick Dark Wraiths as one of the top 3 Dark Souls enemies because I remember how when I first encountered these edgelords, I pissed my pants so much I almost reflooded New Londo ruins. It's the combination of the near pitch darkness, them being hard to spot, and how unusually long and fast their combos are, for Dark Souls 1 standards. Plus whatever the fuck these shields are. They're up against Nox Swordstresses, who might be less imposing and memorable, but have always been enjoyable to fight for me. They use weapons that can extend into whips or transform completely into giant nipples or whatever. That's cool, but what really made me rank them as some of the top Elden Ring enemies is the variant riding on ants. That enemy in specific is excellent. I only wish there were more of them. You get the best of 2 worlds, the nasty but satisfying to slaughter ants, and the graceful, magical Nox ladies. Plus their placement around the puddles with the electric mimic tears can let you create traps for them, so gotta commend the enemy placements there. So the question is, what do I value more? A scary, memorable enemy that's kind of fun to fight, or a less memorable enemy that's really fun to fight? Maybe if Dark Wraiths were up against regular Nox Swordstresses, they'd win, but for those ant variants, I gotta give it to the Nox. So our next battle is completely unfair, and you already know the winner most likely. It's Leonine Misbegottens, spoiler alert. Also controversial opinion alert, I think these guys are a better Gale Phase 1. That's what they remind me the most of, but unlike Gale, who I can kill by being on autopilot, I feel Leonines constantly keep you on your toes. They have the claw swipes that force you to mind your positioning. You either have to outspace it or dodge behind him, because the swipes are too fast to be dodged separately. Same with the charged up spin move. Then there is the one-handed sword flail that requires you to roll the first one early so you have enough recovery time to dodge the second, or just outspace it as well. They dash and jump around, do surprise fall opposite times, and that roar move comes near instantly. It's just a really thrilling fight every time. I wish they were used a bit better rather than often being one half of a shitty gang fight, but when they appear as standard enemies, they're almost unmatched in their greatness. Also worth mentioning now where I draw the line between a mini-boss and a standard enemy. Generally, if they respawn, they count as standard enemies. If they don't respawn, they count as mini-bosses. That means no Crucible Knights or Lion Guardians, I'm afraid. Leonine Misbegottens, on the other hand, do respawn in some areas, like Leyndell and Hellic Tree. Then on the other hand, we have Dark Dwellers, who certainly don't stand a chance because they're not particularly fun to fight. But I do want to give them praise for being genuinely terrifying enemies. They're like weird bat, wendigo, monkey creatures that are used sparingly for maximum effect. And I like how they're scared of light sources, which reinforces the torch gimmick No Man's Dwarf was going for. So, good scary enemies, but come on, Leonine sweeps the mother-hecking fuck out of them. Giant Sharks might be a surprising inclusion on this list because I don't think I've ever seen anyone saying they like these enemies. In fact, usually when I see people discussing Fishing Hamlet as a whole, they say they like it except for the sharks. Whereas I love all of it, sharks and all. A lot of that hatred probably comes from that death trap of a well, where you fight two of them at once. It is brutal, but, you know, at least they give you a giant stone pillar in the middle that can help separate them. That's better than most of Elden Ring gang fights already. And speaking of Elden Ring, I feel like these are almost like an early Elden Ring enemy that was ahead of its time. There's the super long delays to challenge your timing skills, super quick double strikes that need to be outspaced, and just the fact that they could as well be a boss for how complex their moveset is. Not too far off from how Leonine Misbegottens were designed. And it can't not be mentioned just how threatening these sharks are. Their stature, the noises they make, how much damage they can deal and take, and how they just won't let you leave. They'll chase you to the ends of the earth. They're absolute giga-chats. So up against them we have our first Sekiro enemies in this video, Ashina Fencers. You could argue that Sekiro should be excluded from this video, but I can't do that to my beloved Sekiro, it needs to be in. But with the Ashina Fencers, well, compared to the sharks they might seem a tad puny, but they can be deceptively deadly with their sudden thrusts and quick combos. What I enjoy the most about them is how it really feels like a proper fencing duel. They have periods of being more defensive, backing away without letting their guard down, to sudden bursts of deadly slashes. The duels always end very quickly, but that makes them feel even more realistic to me. They're not mini-boss material like the sharks, but rather just fodder enemies in Ashina Castle, and for that role I think they're some of the best FromSoft has made. So I'm on the fence on which one is better. After having sat down for a while to think about it, I think all in all I enjoy the Fencers more. They're just addicting to fight, whereas the sharks can become a little exhausting after a while.
I know, friends.
I feel like RNG has really fucked me, but in a good way, I think. So far most of these pairings have been incredibly difficult for me to decide on, and this one was no different. But I guess that makes for a better video, so thanks RNG. Mimics are, of course, some of the most iconic enemies in Dark Souls. They always get a golden first reaction out of new players.
Oh shit! What the f-
And after that first encounter, you will not forget about them for the rest of the playthrough. You'll never trust chests again, which used to bring you joy upon seeing. So I really love how they turned something positive into something you're now afraid of. Mimics aren't particularly amazing moveset-wise, but the visual design is great, and the kicks look pretty funny. They're a healthy mixture of scary, funny, and bullshit. Now, I said I generally wouldn't count non-respawning enemies, but in the Mimics case, I think it's obvious that they're not mini-bosses. We can probably all agree on that. They just don't respawn because they're essentially one-time loot piñatas. After that, they don't need to come back. Man centipedes are far less iconic, but have one of my favorite visual designs in the entire game, or even series probably. The multitude of horrified, agonized faces on them is just disgusting and terrifying. But are they special in their attack patterns or behavior? I mean, you can dismember them, and that's a first for Demon Souls. But mostly, they just look cool and I enjoy killing them. So, as much as I want to give these guys the victory for just how much they make Upper Latria stand out, I can't make a stronger argument for them over Mimics. I'm not gonna lie, I had real trouble selecting the top 3 best Dark Souls 2 enemies because I'm not really that into any of them. I don't love Iron Warriors either, but I respect the unique mechanic of lava spewing from left and right in turns, making the otherwise simple moveset more interesting with having to make a mental note of where the lava will spew next. Positioning actually matters. Wow! Black Knights are also a victim of a simple moveset, but then again, so are pretty much all the earlier Souls enemies. What made me pick them as best enemies from Dark Souls is how, early on in the game especially, they made me shit myself, and then they come back later in larger numbers and you realize they're actually not that bad. I particularly enjoy parrying them with my bare hand and stabbing them in the dick. I think from a purely mechanical point of view, Iron Warriors are more interesting, but I often associate negative feelings toward them thanks to that gangbang at the gate. I fucking hate that encounter! And that's how you're introduced to the enemy, by the way. Whereas Black Knights I associate with fear, accomplishment, and satisfaction ultimately. So I think they're more deserving for the win. Okami warriors come in a massive assortment of fun fodder enemies. There's ones with katanas, bows, spears, lightning, and balls, and all except the ball kickers are exceptionally fun to fight. Their attacks flow simply perfectly from one to another, and I feel all of your shinobi tools and techniques can be used effectively. They're weak to poison gadgets, anti-air death blows, Mikiri counters, jump counters, and lightning reversal. Their own toolkit is just as fun. They have the Genichiro combo, a spear spin dance, and an endless bounce combo. I mean, seriously, they won't stop until you either miss a deflect or kill them. So, do the monstrous dogs stand any chance against them? Well, yeah, actually they do. And since I lumped so many Okami variants together, I might as well add the monstrous crows on the dog side. Because wherever the dogs are, the crows are there too. Both complement the environment of Caelid so damn well, they alone make this region fun for me. Both are overgrown beasts that are equal parts scary and fun to fight. The dogs are super satisfying to hit in the head, and they're kind enough to do friendly damage to one another, so even fighting groups of them works. Also, needless to say, the visual design for them and the crows is top notch. The dogs are basically T-Rex dogs. Crows are definitely harder to fight, but I love two things about them in particular. One is how you can always time their drop attack by just looking at their legs. Whenever they do this motion, you should roll. And the other is how they can fake getting poise broken. No other enemy in the series can do that as far as I can remember, and it fits well for the crows given that even the real world small ones are very smart birds. But I think even though the dogs and crows are cooler, the Okami warriors are simply the most fun fodder enemies I can think of. Even though they're always quick to kill, it just looks and feels so damn good to do so. They make the absolute best out of Sekiro's mechanics, so I gotta give this one to them. So who's gonna win? Demon Souls versus Demon Souls. That's right, Raid Shadow Legends. So the Black Skeletons are the toughest of the skeletons found in Shrine of Storms, but also the least annoying. I have terrible bad memories of farming them for hours to get a pure Bladestone, and yet I can still without a doubt say that they're pretty good. The experience somehow didn't ruin them for me. What I like about them is how their long combos and far-reaching attacks reward being aggressive and trying to get behind them for a backstab. And, that's about it. Look, the enemy design didn't really get great until Bloodborne as far as I'm concerned, so just pretty good is as good as it gets for Demon Souls. Except for one enemy that's not just pretty good, but just good. And that is the Blue-Eyed Knights. FromSoft first dabble into knights that would evolve into some of the most badass enemies, started right here, and got off to a pretty good start. I mean, good start. Like other knights, they punish reckless aggression with their shields, and in the remake, dodging their attacks feels extra fun thanks to the sound design. So if it wasn't clear enough, we have our winner here. And this right here is where that knight evolution has led us. I don't think I need to tell you guys that ringed knights are the baddest, coolest mother flippers on the face of the planet. You already know they are. But why exactly are they so awesome? Because they look like edgelords. They can light their weapons on fire, their shields can breathe fire and roar, and with those flaming weapons they can create explosions because why not? Both the sword and shield and the spear and shield variants are extremely fun, but then we have the double ultra greatsword one. I feel like I can do more justice by just showing them in action rather than talking about them. I mean, yeah, they're pretty fucking sick. Their opponents in this round are Millwood Knights, who despite being nice as well, feel like a different kind of enemy altogether. It feels like they took the best aspects of your typical hulking fat enemies like Angel Knights and Heralds, and mixed them with your usual knights. They don't have infinite poise and instead rely on hyper armor moves and shields. And there isn't really much for me to say about their moveset other than that they're very fun. I especially like when they buff themselves to make them more aggressive. And this one and only Axe Millwood Knight is like a precursor for Godfrey. He not only has a similar weapon, but can also shatter Earth. Probably a coincidence, but they're badass anyway. Unfortunately for the Millwood Knights, they're competing against Ringed Knights, so as sweet as they are, they're not quite on that level. Scourge Beasts are a great teaching tool for new players adjusting to Bloodborne's focus on player aggression. If you just stick to their butts and keep attacking them, they're not too bad. But if you're passive and stay at a distance, they'll gobble you up. And while any hit staggers them and quicker weapons can keep them stun locked, if you run out of stamina they'll quickly recover by either creating distance or doing a near instant attack. So they're not quite pushovers even after you know how to handle them. Parrying them is also immensely satisfying. They're iconic enemies found all throughout Bloodborne, and who doesn't love them? Drake Keepers have nowhere near the same level of renown. In fact, if anything, they seem to be hated. A stomach ulcer in the form of a video game enemy. These guys are legit some of the worst enemies in the series. They break a rule like no one else breaks. They have extremely damaging attacks and have nearly instant follow-up attacks. Okay, fuck off with the rule breaking, there are no rules enemies have to follow. They do have almost zero pauses in between their combos, that is true, and that's what makes them enjoyable for me. It's still pretty easy to land hits on them if you just try getting behind them, then they can't surprise attack you in the face. Plus they have combo variations, and that's not something every enemy in this game has. They're basically Heights Tower of Flame Knights, but not shit and boring. I don't like the Warpick user though, he sucks. But I do have to give the victory over to Scourge Beast nonetheless, because the Drake Keepers do have extremely janky animations, and only appear in this one remarkably unremarkable area, so they don't leave much of an impression. You're not hallucinating, this is indeed the fourth enemy to be featured from Elden Ring, and that's because I realized I kinda need an even number for the pairings to work, and Elden Ring has by far the most enemies, so it made sense to pick an extra from that game. And this is our final battle of the day, and I left the toughest one for last. I genuinely still have no idea who I'm going to pick, I'll just see who I can convince myself I like more. So let's see, in Elden Ring we have the Gym Bro Duelists. They're very rare to find, as far as I know the only ones that respawn are in Lanedale and Consecrated Snowfield. So their placements could be better, but as for their movesets, I don't think it gets much better than this for non-boss enemies. The axe variants are essentially mini Godfreys. They spin around like the big man himself, do kicks and grabs. Whenever these guys slam their axe to the ground like this, I'm half expecting them to stomp on it. The dual hammer duelists are less like Godfrey, but just as fun as the axe wielders. I love how they can use the chain to extend the hammer swings if you get further away from them. That's really cool. Interior Ministry ninjas are far more frequent in Sekiro, but there are still times when their placements kinda suck. This one rooftop section has like 5 or 6 of them. What the fuck were they thinking? They're not a good fit to be fought in groups at all. Fighting a single one requires all your attention thanks to their varying delays and follow-ups. But man, fuck! That kick combo that ends on a Mikiri counter is so sexy. Literally the best thing in the entire game is stomping on their legs. Some of them are also equipped with poison knives, which forces you to dodge rather than deflect, and that's neat. And, I still don't know which to pick. The duelists are ultra cool motherfuckers, they're bloodthirsty gladiators. But I do also love the drip on the Ministry ninjas. The pink and black looks awesome. I guess the ninjas have better flow to their combos, but at the same time the duelists have more cool moves. But you can't Mikiri counter them like you can the ninjas. But they have emphasis on the positioning, and that's great. But so do the poison ninjas. Oh my fucking god, this is hard. Okay, fuck it, I have decided. Because the Ministry ninjas are far more present in Sekiro, I always get to enjoy them on any and all my playthroughs. They always make the game better, but there are many times I finished Elden Ring without ever coming close to the duelists, since they're always off to the side. So Interior Ministry ninjas are just more of a positive force to the game. So now we have our winners, but who are the best of the best? Well, for me I'd say the top 5 would be Ringed Knights for being the best knights in the series, Okami Warriors for being best fodder enemies, Liana Misbegottens and Duelists for being the best tough enemies, and Ministry Ninjas for being the most satisfying to kill. I know including Sekiro might have been a little unfair since the game has such a different combat system, but honestly there's only like 4 Sekiro enemies I would say are S tier material. If I were to make a top 20 list or something, I think Elden Ring would dominate the shit out of it. So that's about it for this video. Let me know if you guys think this format made any sense at all, and if you'd like to see me do the same, or something else for the worst enemies in the series. And of course, don't forget to use my link in the description or scan the QR code to get special rewards in Raid Shadow Legends.